In the end, Chelsea surrendered their record over Tottenham meekly. The larger wage bill, the exorbitant transfer spend and the years of financial primacy ended up counting for little as Mauricio Pochettino's players vanquished the 28-year hoodoo with surprising ease. Spurs may have been second best for much of the first half, but after Christian Eriksen's swirling, dipping drive had Buckle and Willy Caballero's knees, the home players seemed accepting of their fate. The aftermath will center on Antonio Conte. The Italian has grumbled his way through the season, complaining bitterly and publicly about a perceived lack of financial support, and his discontent has gradually infected the playing staff. It would be a mistake to offer that as a sole diagnosis, though. In the short term, the fractured relationships at the club and the foggy discontent are certainly culpable, but events elsewhere mean that Roman Abramovich and the Chelsea executives have greater concerns than just their malcontent manager. Concerns like their developing identity as a complacent rich kid of English football. Modern super clubs are generally presumed too big to fail. While true, that statement now needs a qualifier, those clubs are too big to fail in the liquidity sense, but they can no longer depend solely on their resources to deliver tangible success. Having the wealth to sign elite players remains a modern imperative, but the drag of aimless spending and coaching change is now more costly than ever before. This is the era of the marginal gain, the holistic approach, and the perpetual pursuit of organizational efficiency. In that context, Chelsea's do it, and do it again philosophy seems outmoded, and, obviously, there's no better time to make this point than after they have been comfortably beaten at home by Tottenham. Tottenham, who are famously frugal. Tottenham with a strict wage ceiling. Tottenham who, somehow, seem destined for their third straight Champions League qualification. It may be difficult to account for Spurs' struggles at Stamford Bridge between 1990 and 2003, but beyond that it's a perfectly logical sequence. Yes, any side can win on any given day, but, really, Abramovich's Chelsea should never lose at home to a team with their structural limitations. The tribal connotations of that defeat are obvious. More broadly though, it's a loss which should sound an alarm. How could the club, with their tight-fisted chairman and relentless pursuit of profit, not just win, but win whilst looking superior in every facet of the game? One bad result in nearly 30 years is not the basis for ideological reform, but events elsewhere are. At the top of the table, Manchester City have sprinted away from the rest of the field and, most likely, will confirm a third Premier League title when they host Manchester United next weekend. Over the course of the season, Jose Mourinho has, much like Conte, sniped and complained. Rather than acknowledge the coaching success occurring across the city, he has chosen to focus on Pep Guardiola's spending patterns. Again, like Conte, it's not unreasonable, but it does miss a broader point. City aren't succeeding simply because they can afford to buy fullbacks at tremendous expense, but because the technical structure which surrounds the team provides an ideal complement. The Abu Dhabi group have spent nearly half a decade searching for that equilibrium, and now, with Guardiola installed under a management committee who view the game from a similar vantage point, they are reaping the benefit. Mourinho's complaints are superficial. He himself is a symptom of his club's problem, not because of any tactical or personality flaws, though he has several, but because he is a short-term appointment at a club who bounce along in year-to-year cycles. It doesn't come at the same cost as it often does at Stamford Bridge, even if United find themselves yards adrift in their own two-team mini-league, but it's a similar imperfection. They often spin without craft and seem instructed by the belief that foresight and pre-planning are only necessary for those teams suffering a competitive disadvantage. Chelsea are not that brazen. They do exhibit many of the same traits, though. At the heart of the Conte issue seems to be a difference in approach. He and his employers do not agree on the route to progress and, whether rightly or wrongly, is convinced that he should hold greater influence over transfer policy. It's also noteworthy, of course, that many other managers in the club's past have been neutered by its political culture. Organizational harmony is a tremendous virtue in modern football and, yet, at Chelsea it is never allowed to exist. Previously, that wasn't such a problem. Their financial might was such that whenever this kind of situation arose, they could afford to perform a hard reset. A manager would be paid off, a new one recruited, and the squad bolstered with suitable headliners. When people talk of clubs being too big to fail, that's the situation to which they are referring, when one season's outcome bears no relation to the next. For those to whom that applied, parity with the Premier League's contenders was never more than a well-directed check away. That's no longer the case. No matter what Chelsea do at season's end, they will not begin 2018-19 on an equal footing with either of the Manchester clubs. They don't have the purchasing power in the market. Stamford Bridge isn't the desirable coaching destination that it once was, and developing players, those who one day hope to be among the best in the world, are starting to see clearer pathways towards their future. The consequence is both highly damaging and already in evidence. Many articles have been written about the club's recruitment, but with good cause. Chelsea now get very little value for their money. Just within the last year, they have spent over £150 million on Alvaro Morata, Ross Barkley, Danny Drinkwater, and Timu Bakayoko. All are good players to an extent, but none of them are truly exceptional, and only Morata was of serious interest to other continental powers. It's reasonable to attribute part of the blame to poor judgment, but it's also fair to say that it's representative of Chelsea's new place in the game and the reputation they've carved for themselves. The finest footballers in the world now belong to Gulf states and more traditional powers, while the layer of talent below is, because of past precedent, now wise to the folly of taking the money and the lights over first-team football. That is what must be addressed. This prohibitive image must be corrected. Stamford Bridge must become a place where careers can be built and where the lines between the first team, the substitutes bench and the rest of the squad are far less rigid than they currently are. If Chelsea can no longer import the very best players, they must adjust around that new reality and create the kind of stability which facilitates organic progress. Ultimately, they are not the club they should be. The operating procedure which served them so well in the last decade has been noted and bettered elsewhere, and failure to recognize and respond to that change has manifested in this stagnation. It is not 2004 anymore. Being ludicrously wealthy isn't enough in England, because every advantage now has to be accentuated to the utmost degree. That's been the case for some time, but, still, Chelsea show no sign of adapting to that present